Hosting the Author Studio, the Edina Arts Center is a jewel in leafy Roslyn Park in the city of Edina. It showcases the Peggy Kelly Media Art Studios, the Margaret Foss Gallery, and the Clark Gift Shop. We have a full-service media transfer department where our staff is close enough to keep your projects simple. Our gallery offers many shows throughout the year, including our annual Members Juried Show in the fall. The center serves over 5,000 students and guests each year and offers classes in painting, drawing, jewelry, photography, writing, and many more. Our pottery department features 15 different kilns, and we're known as the biggest little pottery department in Minnesota. At the Edina Arts Center, we live up to our slogan of, "Every day, I need art." Now sit back and enjoy this episode of the Author Studio, hosted by Colin Nelson. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Author Studio. I am Colin Nelson, the host. I'm also a writer. And today our guest is Mary Logue, whom I will introduce in just a minute. But I wanted to thank all of you for coming today. For those of you people who are new, an especially nice welcome to you. If you get a chance, wander around this fascinating building. Normally, we have these walls covered with art, but we're in between shows today. So Mary will be our art. We can look at Mary. We also encourage you, if you're interested, check out the gift shop, which is to your right. These are all local artists at reduced prices, make wonderful gifts for yourself or for others. Check that out. If you're interested in membership or classes, also check at the desk in the gift shop. We'd love to have you join us. If you don't mind, if you're new, would you please give us your name and your email? We can keep in touch with you. We run the Author Studio the second Saturday of every month. We take the summer off, but it'd be nice to stay in touch with you and let you know of new programs that we have coming up. Thanks, Terry. So I'm going to introduce our guest today, Mary Logue. And normally I don't do this, but Mary is Superwoman. She is Superwoman.
I forgot to wear my belt.
I'm a writer. I have done this much compared to what Mary's done.
Thank you.
So hang on. Are you ready? She has written 4 books of poetry. She's written a young adult novel called Dancing with an Alien, and I think has worked on a series with your significant other, Pete Hauptman, who himself is an excellent author. She's written 2 nonfiction books published through the Minnesota Historical Press, one about Minnesota courthouses. She's written not just a fiction book, she's got 2 series of fiction books. Her latest one in the Claire Watkins mystery series that we'll talk about just came out, was a couple weeks ago?
Yes, yeah.
A Lake of Tears, so we're going to talk about this in a minute. She also has a mystery series. Karen Nash is the character, right?
A librarian. You have to say that.
And if you recall, the Star Tribune last summer ran a serialized novel. Do you remember that? The name of it was Giving Up the Ghost. Here's the ghost. This is the Mary Logue of Star Tribune fame. She's been an editor for a number of different publications. She has won the Minnesota Book Award. And even though it's Wisconsin, She's won the Wisconsin Outstanding Achievement.
This is what can happen when you're by Riverbank. I live in Golden Valley in Stockholm, Wisconsin.
And she's lived all over the world. Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit. And she's a rug hooker. Have I got that right?
Do,
I got to be careful how I say
Yeah.
that. So welcome, Mary, and congratulations on so many things.
Thank you.
What a wonderful year 2013 was for you.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Tell us a little about it.
Well, it's interesting, I think, because sometimes you find the work does pay off. A lot of things that came to fruition in this last year were things I had been working on for quite a long time. But I wrote a picture book that won a Caldecott honor, Sleep Like a Tiger. And that had been a project that I had been thinking of for years. And then I teach in the Hamlin Low Residency Writing for Children. And I work with some incredible picture book writers, and I learned everything from them and was able to write one myself. Then the Star Tribune thing happened, and that was just a real plum and just delightful to work with them. I had in my youth done music reviewing and book reviewing for the Star Trib, but it was really fun to be back there and working with them. So generous, such good editors. And then both my series, I had books coming out. And then also I did a book called Trees, which is poems of mine and black and white charcoal drawings that my sister Dodie Logue did. And so it's just been kind of a romp and frolic of a year.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I have to thank you personally. I met Mary about 25 years ago when we were both in kindergarten.
Right.
She was in a group of writers called the Suspenders because they helped support each other. Isn't that a clever title? And you have always been so helpful and generous to people like me and many other writers. So
we're all in it together is really how I look at it.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your new book. Tell us about Claire Watkins, as you mentioned, or maybe you didn't mention. Claire Watkins is a deputy sheriff in
Pepin
County
Yes.
in near Stockholm.
Yes.
That is Pepin County, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Tell us about that. Why there?
Well, I started writing the series, boy, I should know this, about 20 years ago, and I had bought a house in Stockholm, Wisconsin, when I was just a pumpkin, and I was a single woman, I had no money, and I bought this little house in Stockholm, Wisconsin that was falling down. There were more animals in the house than outside, and I cried every time I went down there. I thought, what have I done? But I completely fell in love with the area. And I'm from Lake Elmo, Minnesota, so it's not too far from where I really grew up, and it's certainly the landscape that I know and love. So I had written 2 standalone mysteries, and I decided it was time to take that step and try a series. And stepping into a series is a big project, I often think it's kind of like you might date a guy, but then when you think about marrying him, you have to be a little more careful. And it's kind of the same way when you think about who's going to be the character that I'm going to live with now for the next 9 books. So I made a bunch of decisions about Claire Watkins. I knew I wanted her to be a cop, that she would have a reason to be involved in criminal investigations. I knew that I wanted her to have a child because I really wanted her to be vulnerable, and I think children can make us very vulnerable. I wanted her to be single because I really love writing about romance, and I think romance, if done well, is extremely suspenseful, and I love writing suspense. So I killed off her husband before the book started. I wanted her also to be a foreigner, and what I mean by that is she grew up in the Twin Cities, she was a cop in Minneapolis, and all of a sudden she's a deputy sheriff in the smallest county in Wisconsin. And it's a real eye-opener for her. And part of the reason I did that was it was an eye-opener for me too. I was new to Stockholm and Pepin County. I was surprised by the way news traveled through the community. It was very interesting for me, and I wanted to be able to write about that. Plus, I felt like as a newcomer, I still had a lot to learn, and I wanted to show that through Claire. As the series has gone on, Claire has definitely has become part of the community very deeply. The other thing that was really important to me, Colin, was I really saw the Claire Watkins mystery series as a kind of a in between a cozy mystery, which is more lighthearted and not violent and more of a romp, and then the darker, hard-boiled mystery. And I really see the Claire Watkins series is kind of combining elements of both. It has the sense of setting of a cozy, it has the eccentric characters of a cozy often, but it has the not so much violence, but the reality, if you will, of criminal investigation. And also, I really wanted to write mysteries in which the murder made a difference, that it was felt through the community. And oftentimes when Claire's investigating, she maybe knows the person who has been killed. If she doesn't, she knows their sister, she knows their family, she knows their friends. It's a very, very different kind of investigation than often we see portrayed in the big city, homicide.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town. You do a wonderful job in that series, bringing us back into a small town with, for instance, what you just said. That's an excellent point.
Thanks.
And of course, you live there, so you know it intimately.
Well, it was funny
You
too.
know the
Yeah,
area.
because when the first book came out, which was Blood Country, I left. Pete and I moved down to Tucson, and I left for like almost 9 months, and I actually was kind of afraid. I wasn't sure how people were going to take it. Well, I came back, and everybody's like, well, we think we know who so-and-so is, and I just loved it. And I created a town, Fort Saint Antoine, which is a supposed, it is a French fort that was built in the 1600s, someplace on Lake Pepin. But I've done a lot of research, and I have yet to really, really pinpoint where it is. There is a roadside marker between Pepin and Stockholm, Wisconsin, that is supposed to be where Fort Saint Antoine was. But the archaeologists came and did a dig, and they couldn't really find any evidence, which I love even more. So I put the town there because I thought I need to at least create a fictitious town, so I don't get run out of the town I live in.
Yes. Well, most authors will focus on one genre. For instance, when Julie Kramer was here about a year ago, she said her publishers are pushing her to brand her character and don't deviate from that. And yet you've written poetry, nonfiction. Why? Tell us about the breadth of what you've done. And do you get bored writing?
No, I don't get bored. I get frustrated, irritated.
What do you mean?
I don't know what I'm doing, and the characters don't behave, and things like that.
I'm boss.
I think that I started writing very young. We won't go into the grade school stuff.
Okay.
But I was the editor of my high school newspaper. I worked for the Minnesota Daily. I went to the U, and I wrote for both papers in the Twin Cities. I kind of wrote whatever anybody would let me write, in a way. I mean, I just loved writing, and I didn't distinguish so much. I'm not sure it was a good decision, but when the Minnesota Historical Society called up and said, do you want to write a book on courthouses, I said yes. Poetry in many ways is really my base, however, I will say. It really is where most of my work comes out of, even my mysteries. Really, my sense of place, my sense of how I give the world to my readership is metaphor-based, is really based on description, and it's really kind of the closest to my heart, if you will. But it's so interesting, I find, like writing the children's book, very similar to writing poetry. And again, even my mysteries, I do think there's passages where my poetic self kind of pops her head up. And I found, so I started out writing poetry, but then I really felt like I had bigger stories to tell. And so that's when I started writing fiction and novels. But everything just kind of seems to build outward. I don't know.
So you're saying you can transfer skills from poetry to novels to nonfiction, because that would seem to be, to me, to be very hard.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I think it goes both ways. I mean, I think my mystery writing affects my poetry too. I think somebody came up to me the other day and said, oh, I love the turns that you have at the end of your poems. And I thought, you know, I do think that's something I learned from writing mysteries, that you have the reader aimed in one direction, and then you kind of skew it, and it's like this little twirl. And so in a poem of mine, you might be thinking I'm writing about an icicle or the snow, and all of a sudden you see I'm writing about loss or you know, eternity, or, you know, I mean, so that movement, I think it's really energetic. And I think I definitely learned some of that from writing.
Let's look at nonfiction for a while then. Do you think you had, did you have to learn new things?
You know, the very first thing I wrote nonfiction was a book I did with Gaylord Shanelek, an amazing printmaker who lives in Stockholm, Wisconsin. And he and I were eating donuts together one day, and he said, I'd really like to do a book about Stockholm. And I said, well, I've been writing some essays. And that, again, was, I think in some ways led into the Claire Watkins. I mean, some of that writing was the beginning of, it was kind of the story of how I found my house and saved it, and the bats, the relationship I had with bats. And but when I wrote my first, the nonfiction book, Halfway Home, that was about my grandmother who grew up in Chicago, Minnesota, which is in the bump of Minnesota on the western side, so almost into South Dakota, I found that I felt more like a detective writing that book.
Really?
Than I did almost writing my mysteries. Because there were two mysteries I was kind of trying to track down with my grandmother. She died when I was 9. And I had always heard that her husband died when my mother was 5. And I had always heard that she had a boyfriend, so I was really interested in that. And I did find him, but I had a huge false, I thought it was one guy who was a postmaster way up north, and then I found out it was the editor of the Mankato Free Press. And then I actually found out how well, anyways, you can see how excited I get. You know, the other thing is I found out I absolutely adore research. You know, I love doing research for books. I do a lot of research from my Claire Watkins. The sheriff of Pepin County has been incredibly kind to me and generous. And I often have to research sorghum presses, and I won't mention what I do with sorghum presses because we don't need to talk about that. And what illnesses chickens have, and you know, I have to do a lot of research on farm equipment because I don't know that much about it. So there's a lot of crossover between.
That you could use.
Yeah, absolutely.
Genres. Yeah. Huh. What is the interesting book you've got on your lap there?
Well, again, I mentioned.
By the way.
I mentioned trees. Should I read a
Yes,
poem?
would you please?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Tell us a little. Well,
I
read the
will.
poem
I will.
First, and then
well,
tell
what
us about
happened was, again, I'm a rug hooker, and I always thought it was really cool. A lot of women who hook rugs have kind of totems. They love chickens, or they love squirrels, or they love pigs, or something. And I never felt like I had a totem, you know. I wanted one, and I kept kind of checked bears or wolves. Then one day I realized bats.
Why not
bats? Yes,
Mice.
actually. One day I realized I had a totem, and it was trees. And I looked back at my rugs, and I had done about 4 or 5 rugs that were trees, some of them circular with roots. And so I thought, oh, this is so great. And then I realized I'd been writing a lot of poems about trees. And then my sister at the same time was doing these amazing charcoal drawings of trees. And so we decided to do a book together. And what was so interesting was we had already both done the work. and it came together. So there's 16 poems of mine about trees and 16 of her drawings. And I'm going to read you a poem that, again, takes a lot from living in Stockholm. It's very much the setting of this poem. And it's also a little bit, I had a kind of a hard period a few years ago where I took a dip, and I was just trying to come out of it, and this was a poem that came out of that time. It's called Unwinding. The shoulders of the bluffs are generous with green. So is the comfort of the fields. The universe unrolls with every step we take. Like pollen, love sifts over everything. The last yellow held in the willow leaves turns my heart into a bird. My body unwinds like a spool of thread when touched in the right way. The moon walked with me tonight as I headed toward home. Remember how it feels to open a door for the first time. Light breaks out. Turn around as many times as you need to finally see. Like a top, you blur into a hum. Keep unwrapping the present. Drink the cup of sun the earth has handed you. There's more.
Ah.
Thank you. And here's the picture that goes along. You can see the moon walking.
That's musical. I think you should start writing music now too.
Oh no.
Let's talk about poetry, because you said that's really your passion.
Yeah.
And for people like me who can't get much beyond Robert Frost, for instance. I love Robert Frost.
I do too.
But, you know,
yeah.
Poetry can be kind of intimidating to me. Like, will I understand it? Will I get it?
Yeah.
Well, what should I do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you don't have to like poetry. There's a lot of poetry out there, really contemporary stuff. I'm not really crazy about it, but there are some incredible poets, both throughout the ages and writing today, and you just have to look for them. I mean, I feel like listening to a good poem isn't really about understanding it. It's about feeling it. It's about like the bell in your body ringing. You kind of go, oh, I don't really know what she's talking about, but I think I've had that feeling, you know? And so I think we have to give ourselves some leeway and some freedom to just enjoy it and not try to analyze it. It's again like looking at a painting. You know, sometimes you don't even know if it's abstract what the painting is, but it gives you an incredible sense of warmth or comfort or fear or sorrow. And that's what it's, you know, we're just here to talk to each other. We're here to communicate, and really, I'm so conscious when I'm writing of you. I'm so conscious of the reader. You're always with me, and I'm just trying to convey to you where I am in the world, and hope that you've been there too sometime. Does that?
Yes, that helps immensely. You are a teacher and have been for years. If we had people in the audience who were secretly poets at home all by themselves, what recommendations would you give to them?
Well, I used to teach English comp, and I always loved it. And a lot of English professors don't like comp. It's really kind of the lowest low on the totem pole. But I always started my students in very, very close. So to write about something that's right, like the salt and pepper shakers that you use every day, or the coffee mug, or the tree out the window. So, you know, often that's the way into a bigger world. You know, if we try to write about the bigger world, it can be really overpowering and scary and too much, and we say things that are kind of cliche. But when we write about the things that we live with, we know them better than anybody else does, and it's a really good place to start. So,
who's the poet that wrote about a cobweb for? I can't think. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, maybe.
It might have been Elizabeth Bishop, but
wrote about an entire poem about a cobweb. And
well,
it went on a long time.
Pablo Neruda is really good for that too. He wrote about a pair of knitted socks that his housekeeper made for him, and it's just an absolutely beautiful poem. And it's about so much more than a pair of socks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for the advice. You also have traveled all over the world. In fact, Mary did something that my wife and I should have done. You took was it a 3-month, years ago, Pan Am, when we used to have a Pan American Airlines, offered a ticket around the world, wasn't it? You had to go one direction only.
Yeah. Yep.
It was maximum of 3 months, and my wife and I talked about doing it. You really did it, though.
Yeah. Well, I confess to Colin, and I were talking yesterday, and I confess that I'm not a very good traveler, which is really ironic because I've lived in England and in Belgium and France and Tucson, and I've traveled really a lot, but I'm a little anxious. And I worry about like train schedules and flights. And I've gotten better actually as I've gotten older because I've really seen that it kind of cramped my style. To go back to the trip around the world, it was unbelievable. I mean, we started in Japan, and we had friends in Japan, in the Philippines, and then in England. And so that was really great. One thing I learned about myself was I taught swimming when I was young, and I grew up on our wonderful lakes, and I love swimming so much. And I always loved W. Somerset Maugham and the South Pacific, and I thought, put me on a Caribbean island or on an island in the South Pacific on a beach and I would be happy forever. I found out not the case. After 2 days, I'm kind of bored.
Maybe this winter?
Yeah. But I found the places I loved the most was where there was a lot of intensity of culture.
I've had the same experience.
Yeah,
as I've gotten older.
I've loved Japan. I loved India. Those were maybe my 2 favorite places, and where the culture was just kind of just so raucous. And I felt more like a foreigner in Japan than any place I've ever been. And I could actually fit into the clothes, but so I was the right size. But anyway, yeah, it was. And I'll tell you the one thing though too that I think it really helped my writing in that, especially living in New York, which I did for 4 years, I learned what a great place, not what a great place this is, but where we live, how unusual it is. People would often ask me about what it was like to grow up in Minnesota. New Yorkers were fascinated. Finally, I was working on the Village Voice, and this one woman who grew up in Manhattan, in the East Village, was a little bit older than me, and she looked at me one day and she said, "Mary, you talk about the weather more than anyone I have ever met." And I would get so homesick for the sky that I would go down to Houston Street where you could actually see a span of it because I would miss the sky. I loved the buildings, but I would miss the sky. And it was there that I started writing my first published novel, which was Red Lake of the Heart, and which was really an homage to the lakes and swimming and kind of how I grew up. So I think one of the things that travel has given me is a even more deep and abiding love for here. I have this odd feeling when I live someplace else like it's not real. I don't know why. I'm sure that's not the case for many people. But when things happen to me here, they feel real to me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you've talked about Stockholm, Wisconsin, how that location has influenced so much. It's kind of like, what's his name? Frederick Manfred, who wrote about South Dakota.
Yeah.
I knew partly about him because his brother was a lawyer in Minneapolis for many years. But Manfred writes about the South Dakota and the prairies and does such a wonderful job.
Well, it's kind of like what I was talking about, writing about your salt and pepper shakers. I mean, I could write about New York, I could write about France, but a lot of people have done that. And I can really write about the Mississippi River. I really intimately know the Mississippi.
Sick chickens and...
Yeah, sick chickens.
Yeah, well, you do. I think one of your Claire Watkins books, isn't the body found in the river? There was a little swirl or something in the river.
Well, this is so funny. I love reading the newspapers down. So I was reading the Red Wing newspaper. That was Point No Point. And there was a body, this is a true story, that was found by Diamond Bluff. In the Mississippi, the river, the body was. And the Goodhue County Sheriff's Department came from Red Wing and realized the body was on the other side of the river, so the Pierce County guys had to come and get it. Well, I thought I can do one better than that. So I put the body in Lake Pepin, and I love maps, and so I had the Corps of Engineers maps for the Mississippi for Lake Pepin, and I knew exactly where the three counties came together. So I have Goodhue and Pierce and Pepin County, and they're in the Goodhue county's in this big, beautiful, huge boat, then Pierce County a little smaller, and then Claire's in a little rowboat, and of course the body ends up being hers,
I remember that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the creative process in any of your genres. What germ or what little bit of irritation, or what does it take you to get going on a book?
Yeah, and you just heard one of my little germs. I'll tell you another one. Well, one thing I want to back up for a quick second. I'm the kind of kid that when I was like 5 or 6, I would sit and look at the linoleum floor in our bathroom and make stories out of it. So storytelling has always been an intrinsic part of my life. But I had a wonderful thing happen for my first YA, Dancing with an Alien. I was going down to Stockholm from the Twin Cities, and Prescott used to have a great little bakery, and I really was extremely fond of their French donuts. And so I was getting a little peckish, so I had to stop in Prescott to get a French donut. So I went into the bakery, and there were 2 teenagers working there, boy and a girl. And the boy looked at the girl and said, well, he said, it was like dancing with an alien. And I went, oh, wow. So I got my donut, and I took that line, and I got in the car, and I wrote the book. 45 minutes later, when I pulled into Stockholm, Pete was there, and I said, I think I have this YA novel. He goes, okay, write it. And I wrote it really fast, because I really had almost the whole story. And so, it's just... ideas, I have aplenty. I have more ideas than I know what to do with. I have like 3 ideas right now. I was talking to Peter at dinner, and he liked one. I kind of told him some of my ideas. And, it's just you kind of live with them and see what one grows and what keeps bugging you. And so anyway, that's...
Is it something you get... irritated with? It's like I have to get this out, or is it something you get excited about?
Different stories, I think, take different forms. Some you're irritated by. Like I wrote a Maiden Rock. One part of that story was something I always wanted to write about, which was the Maiden Rock, which is the legend of Winona jumping off the cliff because her dad Wabasha wanted her to marry somebody she didn't want to. And I just love that story. I don't know that it's true, but I loved it. And but the other piece was methamphetamine use in rural communities. And because I was writing set in Pepin, Wisconsin, I felt like I was really doing a disservice in a way to my community if I didn't write about methamphetamine use, because it was just so horrific and taking over and so infesting rural communities in a way that often drugs didn't. And so those 2 things came together to make Maiden Rock. And so part of it was really kind of fun, and part of it was not so fun. But yeah, so they different impulses, I guess.
What is it you like about mysteries? Why do you write mysteries? If poetry is your first love, how do you get...
Well, I actually think there's a really deep connection between poetry and mystery, maybe only for me. But the intensity of emotion oftentimes. That in mystery we're really looking at love taken to the nth degree sometimes, hatred taken to the nth degree. Really, what would make you kill someone? I mean, really kind of philosophical questions. And I think often these are the same things that are explored in poetry. Not always. And I have light moments in my Claire Watkins, absolutely. And I'm really interested in mother-daughter relationships and, and all that. But, and gossip and how, news travels. But I really think that at the core, we're talking about intensity of relationship, of emotion, kind of. So I think the other thing is I really wanted to learn how to plot, and I just think a mystery is a really good way to
critical.
learn. Yeah. So.
I think it was Mary Higgins Clark who talks about actually working backwards.
Yeah.
She figures out the end
Yeah.
and then plants the clues as she goes forward with the story.
Yeah, I often think I know the end, but I try to stay flexible because, again, I think that, as they say, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And often I'm surprised by where it ends up being when I thought it was something else.
So you aren't sure where you're going?
Well, I think
start
I
the
know where
story?
I'm going. Again,
The end.
it's like traveling. You think you're going to get to London, but maybe you end up in Cornwall.
Stockholm, Wisconsin.
I don't know.
Yeah. What are you working on for the future?
Well, again, I've had such a year. I kind of feel like, now what?
Screenplays. You
Huh?
haven't tried screenplays, have you?
I have. I've written two
of course.
movies. Sorry. I'm actually working on a YA novel that is about a 16-year-old girl who gets hit by lightning as the book opens, and then is kind of dealing with who she becomes because of the lightning strike. And she wants to go back. She wants to be who she was. And so it's really coming to accept who she's become and what that means. And yeah, I'm really having a lot of fun with it.
What's the difference between writing for that market, young adults, versus your Claire Watkins mystery, for instance?
Well, what's interesting is that I do think that my Claire Watkins, a lot of YA is being read by adults. So there's a lot of crossover now, which is really wonderful and interesting. There's also crossover with my Claire Watkins. A lot of teenagers read
Could
my
read
book.
that, sure.
Partly because Meg, Claire's daughter, is such an important character and becomes more important as the series goes on. She's very, very important in Maiden Rock especially. So I actually have gone to high schools and talked about it. The difference is really, mainly who's the main character. Are they 16 or are they 26 or are they 56? So other than that, not a lot. And in fact, there is the book of the Book Thief was published in Australia originally, and that was published as an adult book, and in America it was published as a YA. So I think that line is very fluid right now. And I think when I write YA, I really don't, I'm very aware of my readership, but I also see my readership as being large. That I would hope that most of my YA books would be really enjoyed by adults also.
Good.
Yeah.
Can we talk just a little bit about publishing? And then I'd like you to read another poem. You've been with tell us about the different genres. Is the same publisher? No, has not done all of those.
No.
Tell us a little bit about
I
that.
should count up how many publishers I've been with, because even the Claire Watkins mystery series has been through 4 publishers, which is kind of stunning, and not the best way to do it. But I was with Walker at first for 3 books, and then they decided to dump their mystery line. Then I went to Ballantine for a couple books. Then they decided I was too local or regional. Then I went to Tyrus. Now I'm with Tyrus F&W Media, which is a local press out of Madison, Wisconsin. I've been with the local press, Midlist, for my poetry. I've been with Minnesota Historical Society. Often Houghton Mifflin published my my children's book, and Random House published my YA. So I've been with a lot of presses. I have to say I really love working with the small presses a lot. I think that you get more say in your book. You get more, you're more involved. And I really love publishing. I mean, as you said, I've been an editor. I really like being involved with the book. And I remember when my first book was going to be published by Dell, and I went to New York to meet my editor, and I said to her I had an idea for the cover. And she almost patted me on the head, I'm not kidding, and said, oh, isn't that cute? You know, you think you're going to have a say in the cover, you know? And in fact, I never thought I didn't ever really think I would do a self-published book, but Trees, Dodie and I published ourselves, partly because we had such a clear vision of what we wanted it to be, that I really, and we hired a book designer who was a friend of Dodie's, and it was wonderful. I loved being that involved. So, I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Thoroughly. You are a teacher. Could you read us another poem, please?
Sure. Okay, now I have to warn you, this is a very short poem, and unfortunately very appropriate for where we are now. It's called Long Winter. Okay.
Luckily, it's short, right? The poem, I mean.
Yes. Long winter. I write to sing in a slight voice. The trees are still here under snow, and I know they have leaves in their branches.
That is helpful. That is very helpful.
Thank you.
So I'm going to put in a pitch for Mary. Her books are available in the gift shop. She also teaches at the Loft and at Hamlin. So if you'd like to take classes from Mary, contact her. Questions? Yes, Rhonda.
Could you tell us a little bit about the book that won the Minnesota Book Award and what year that was?
Yeah, it was Dark Cooley, the second book in my series. I've been nominated a few times, but that was, and of course, wouldn't you know, that was the year I was living in Tucson. So it was very interesting. My, my 10th grade English teacher had gotten in touch with me just a few months before. And so since I wasn't able to be there, I asked him to go in my place. And I said, just in case I win, you know, and that was the time I won. So it was kind of fun. He got to pick up the award. But Dark Cooley is the second book in this series, and the Coolies are the river, they're like dry washes that come down. And it's called Coulee Country down along the river, the Bluffland. So yeah, that's the book that won. Yeah.
I'm originally from New York, and I've lived here for 30 years, and I've always been drawn to the area that you write about, and have a house in Lake City, and I could never figure
Across the
out
lake.
what the connection is between New York and my love for that Mississippi Bluff area.
Yeah.
Until I realized that it looks to me almost exactly like
The Hudson River.
Oh.
Yes.
Palisades.
Yes.
Yes. No, that's very interesting you should say that, because I lived in New York for 4 years, from age 28 to 32. I had a place with a bunch of friends out in the Hamptons and up in Poughkeepsie in the summer. And, you know, and we had to drive 3 hours either way to get to our places. And so when I moved back here, I was totally broke, but my first book was coming out, and I went down to write in Stockholm, Wisconsin, and came home with a house. You know.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah.
I was driving from my
Yeah.
father's funeral from New York to Minnesota and
Wow.
bought a house.
I had no intention. I know. We really know how to buy the souvenirs, don't we? But I think, and it was interesting, I think it was partly, so I'll just tell you, I paid $17,500. But it was 25 years ago. And at the time I thought, that is like rent for a year in New York City. And also, it's an hour and a half away, and it's an easy drive. So I think having lived in New York influenced me buying. Plus, everybody goes north.
Exactly.
And I thought, why is everybody going north?
Yes,
There's more
yes.
sun down south. And I have to say that we get a little more sun on our side of the river, too. But and you're right across the river. I love looking over at Lake City and seeing, is it an old grain elevator that we see? Yeah. So very fun. Thank you. Yeah, I think and I love that. I used to take the train up the Hudson to Albany, and that is such a beautiful train ride. So, yeah. And I love the train ride down along, because you go through Lake City. When you take the train to Chicago, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Other questions? I had a similar experience with a 10th grade English teacher. I think he discovered I was writing by my second book, and so he came
Oh, fun.
to the book release.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful to make that connection. But
Yeah.
unlike you, I had to apologize to him for all the bad things
Oh,
I did
yeah.
when I was in high school.
Yeah.
You probably didn't have to do that. But
Well, we won't go there.
it's a great opportunity to tell him, oh, I'm sorry I did this, and that. But thank you for coming.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you speak to the difference between getting non-poetry published and getting poetry published?
Interesting. Surprisingly, it's hard to get poetry published. It's especially hard to get a book of poetry published. I was an editor and read a lot for a couple presses, Milkweed and Coffee House, and I was stunned by the level of poetry manuscripts that were coming in to these small presses and what we could pick. For like one book, I would look at 600 books sometimes, and they were well published. So it's not any easier. What I really recommend is publishing individual poems as very locally. I love publishing poetry in newspapers and little magazines and any place that I can publish it. I was telling Colin, I'm kind of a stealth poet. I try to get poetry into, like I'm often invited to talk about my mystery writing, and I always read poetry when I'm, because I really believe in getting it out there. And I love to have it in the newspaper, in the local rag. I just think it's so great to have people see it more often. So.
Good point. Good point.
I'd like to hear about the writing of your children's book as well.
Oh yeah, what fun. I just felt like, I had this idea, it's called Sleep Like a Tiger, and I had the idea I worked for the creative company out of Mankato as their children's book editor for about 5 years, and I just fell deeply in love with children's book writing, and but wasn't, I had this idea for a book about a little girl who doesn't want to go to sleep. And then when I was at Hamlin, I really got the tools. And that sounds odd because obviously I've written a lot of different things, but there's a couple, there's definitely a few things you need to know about writing for children. One is don't put anything in the text that could be handled by the illustration. And that's awfully hard for an adult fiction writer because we're so...
It's an interesting point.
Yeah, we're so used to detail, and you don't
And describing things.
Yeah, don't do it, and other things that I picked up, and so I finally got this format where the little girl doesn't want to go to sleep, and her parents very gently edge her toward bed, and then they talk about all the animals and how they go to sleep, and she kind of puts herself to sleep by imagining that she is each animal. So it is so much fun. I just have enjoyed having that book out in the world. I think it's the book I have enjoyed the most having out there. For some way it feels very unthreatening.
How do you, at our age, how do you get the voice of a younger adult?
Oh
or
man,
child?
she's alive and kicking. Oh yeah, no,
Inside?
oh yes. You know, when I write the Claire mysteries, when I first started writing them, Claire's daughter, was only 7, and I realized that Meg was me. Claire is not me, but Meg is me. So I'm very.
There it
I
is.
think partly, you know, I haven't had kids. And I think, I don't know, this is a theory, but if you don't have children, you don't ever totally become the parent. And so
Yes.
maybe it leaves a little more of the kid in you. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
That's
you
an
know.
interesting
Yeah.
theory.
You know, sounds good.
Other questions? Yes.
Did you get to work with the illustrator for the children's book?
No, this is so interesting. No, I didn't at all. And but my editor and the art director decided, and she had Pamela Zagorensky is the illustrator, and she had just won a Caldecott honor a couple years previous. So when I found out who was who was illustrating my book, I went online and I was just so happy. But then I got the galleys. And when they came to me, I saw nothing in advance, no sketches or anything. And it came to me like a book almost in these big sheets. It was just like Christmas and my birthday. It was just incredible. She's a stunning illustrator. And talk about knowing the child's mind, the world. I felt like the world inside my little girl's head was on the page.
Wow.
You know, it was just incredible. So, yeah.
Yes.
What movies did you write?
Oh, well, I have written a couple feature-length films that nothing's ever happened with them. One got optioned, but nothing came of it. But we have a film festival down in Stockholm, Wisconsin, and they asked me to write a couple scripts for a film that would be done in Stockholm. So the first one was called Dinner at the Lake. And it's about a creature, well, you don't know, everybody's making this incredible feast. And we have a 600-foot stone pier that goes out into the lake, and they bring tables out, and they set up this incredible banquet on this pier that goes out into the lake. And the very last scene is you see the guest. Well, you don't see the guest, but he's coming out of the water to join them.
Aha.
It was so much fun. And then I wrote River Road Romance was the second one I wrote, about an older couple that happened to land in this little village and keep running into each other and fall in love. So it was very fun.
Any other questions? Yes.
What are some of your favorite poets?
Poets? I love Mary Oliver. I love an Israeli poet named Yehuda Amichai. He's just a terrific poet. And I love Rumi, the Persian poet. I love Anna Akhmatova, who's a Russian woman poet. We have Jim Moore, who's a Minnesota poet, he's certainly my favorite living poet. I'm just nuts about him. He's brilliant. We have such good poets. We have such good writers here. You know,
A lot of them.
we do.
Yes.
Colin included.
Thank you. Thank you. Time for one more question. Would you mind reading one more poem
I'd
to
love
finish?
to.
I'm going to
Yeah.
thank Dr. Michael Fry, who is the director of the Arts Center, and Don and Phil for your help with audio and video. Always wonderful work. Thank you all for coming. Mary, if you could read one more
Okay,
poem.
I'm going to read a poem that's the positive side
Great.
of our weather. Swirls, it's called. Snow turns the woods black and white until a cardinal dashes red from tree to tree. A lovely long slit in the creek is still burbling dark water. Around the edges of ice form scrolls like galaxy swirls. I stare into the water and twirl for a moment. The woods surround me, and I invite the trees into my heart. Thank you.
Thank you.